The heavy, copper scent of my own blood was nothing compared to the ice that flooded my veins as I heard his voice through the heavy mahogany door. "She is nothing but a womb to carry the royal lineage, Celine. Once the pup is born, I will banish her to the outer borders and place the crown on your head." With those 18 words spoken in the dark, my world, my mate bond, and my future as the Luna of the Blackwood Empire shattered into dust. The corridors of the lunar citadel were always cold at midnight. But tonight, the obsidian stone felt like ice beneath my bare feet. I held the crumpled piece of parchment tightly against my chest. It was a medical report from the pack physician, stamped with the silver crest of the royal pack. Pregnant, twins. My heart had been beating like a trapped bird all the way from the medical wing. I wanted to run to him. I wanted to fling myself into Kalen's arms and watch that rare, breathtaking smile break across his usually stern, aristocratic face. He was the Alpha King, feared by the 5 coastal packs, ruthless in battle and unyielding in politics. But to me, he was my fated mate. The man who whispered promises of forever into the crook of my neck when the rest of the world was asleep. Or so I had desperately believed. As I approached the heavy, gold-leaf doors of his private study, the air grew thick. The physical weight of Kalen's alpha aura spilled out from the cracks of the doorway, pressing against my lungs like a physical hand. It was a dominant, suffocating force, smelling of dark cedarwood, ozone, and crackling winter frost. But tonight, his scent was tangled with something else. An artificial cloying fragrance of white orchids and metallic copper. Lady Celine, the daughter of the Northern Duke, and the woman the council had tried to force Kalen to marry before the moon goddess chose me, a low-born Omega healer, as his mate. I stopped, my hand hovering inches from the brass handle. "You must look at the larger picture, Kalen." Selena's voice drifted through the gap, smooth, calculated, and sharp as a silver blade. "The Northern Alliance is fracturing. My father's armies will not march south to protect your borders unless our bloodlines are united. The Omega girl has no political leverage. She brings you nothing but a weak heritage." I held my breath, waiting for Kalen's furious defense. I waited for him to unleash his terrifying aura, to roar at her for insulting his fated mate. Instead, there was only a long, agonizing silence. When Kalen spoke, his voice was not filled with rage. It was calm, pragmatic, the voice of a king making a transaction. "The mate bond is a biological inconvenience, Celine. Nothing more." Each word felt like a physical blow to my chest. My wolf, Lily, let out a silent, agonized whimper inside my mind, curling into a tight, defensive ball. "The pack requires an heir of royal blood to secure the succession," Kalen continued, his tone devoid of the warmth he had used with me just hours before. "She is currently carrying. Once the pup is born and the succession is secure, she will be quietly moved to the western estate at the edge of the territory. I will strip her of the Luna title under the guise of poor health. The crown will be yours, Celine. You have my word." "And your heart?" Celine purred. "My heart belongs to the crown," Kalen replied coldly. "Love is a luxury for those who do not rule." In the flickering light of the hallway, my vision blurred. The parchment in my hands crumpled further. He didn't love me. To Kalen, I was not his partner, his equal, or his beloved. I was an incubator, a temporary vessel to produce heirs before being discarded like trash to secure a political alliance. If I stayed, my children would be taken from me. They would be raised by Celine, a woman who looked at me with thinly veiled disgust, while I was locked away in a gilded cage at the edge of the world, slowly dying of a broken mate bond. A cold, fierce clarity washed over me, drowning out the agonizing pain in my chest. My father had been a rogue survivalist. He had taught me how to read maps, how to mask my scent, and how to survive in the wilderness before he passed. I was not a helpless victim. I was a mother now, and I would rather die than let my children be raised as pawns in their political games. I slowly backed away from the door, my footsteps silent on the stone corridor. I returned to his bedchamber. The luxurious silk sheets still smelled faintly of his cedarwood scent. It made me sick. I did not cry. There was no time for tears. I moved with calculated precision. I stripped off my elaborate silk nightgown and pulled on sturdy, dark traveling leathers. I packed only the essentials: a map of the border mountains, a small pouch of silver coins I had earned from my healing work, and dried rations. Lastly, I reached up and unclasped the heavy, teardrop diamond necklace Kaylin had gifted me during my coronation. The Luna's star. I placed it gently on the dark wood of the vanity table. Beside it, I laid the crumpled medical report confirming my pregnancy. Let him know exactly what he lost, I thought. A bitter, cold satisfaction settling in my throat. To escape, I couldn't use the Grand Gates. The elite enforcers were fiercely loyal to Kaylin, and their sensory perception was too sharp. But during my months as Luna, I had mapped out the ancient, forgotten servants' tunnels beneath the kitchens. Tunnels once used to transport goods during winter sieges. I slipped out of the side door of the residential wing, blending into the shadows. The cold rain soaked through my leather cloak instantly, but I welcomed it. The heavy downpour would wash away my physical tracks, but my scent, the sweet, unmistakable scent of wild honey and lilies, would still linger for Kaylin's tracking hounds. At the entrance of the servant tunnels, I pulled a small vial of dark, viscous oil from my pocket. Wolfsbane. With trembling hands, I uncorked the vial and rubbed the bitter, toxic oil directly onto my wrists and neck. The reaction was immediate. A searing, white-hot burn tore through my skin as the silver-infused herb reacted with my wolf biology. Tears of pure agony sprung to my eyes, and my hands shook violently. But I forced myself to swallow the scream rising in my throat. The wolfsbane would scar, and it would agonizingly suppress my wolf's healing abilities for weeks. But it was the only way to completely mask my scent from a royal alpha. I stumbled into the dark, damp tunnels, my breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. I ran. I ran through the pitch-black stone passages, holding my burning wrists to my chest, guided only by the faint light of my fading wolf sight. An hour later, I pushed open the rusted iron grate at the end of the tunnel, tumbling out onto the muddy forest floor at the very edge of the Blackwood borderline. The storm was howling now, a furious tempest that mirrored the storm in my soul. I looked back at the distant, glowing spires of the lunar citadel. My heart stopped. The howl was raw, feral, and filled with a devastating, earth-shattering fury. Kaylin. He had returned to the bedroom. He had found the necklace, the pregnancy report, and my empty bed. The Alpha King's hunt had begun. I turned my back on the Empire, took a deep, burning breath of the freezing air, and took my first step into the lawless, rogue-infested neutral territories. The raw fury of Kaylin's roar echoed across the mountain peaks, vibrating through the very earth beneath my boots. It was a sound that would have once made me run toward him for protection. Now, it made my blood run cold. Run, my mind screamed, but my body was failing. The wolfsbane was a cruel master. Every breath I took felt like inhaling crushed glass, and my wrists and neck were on fire. The toxic oil had begun to seep into my bloodstream, actively fighting my wolf's natural healing factor. Lily was silent, locked behind a heavy wall of chemical pain, unable to offer me her strength. My hands trembled violently as I dragged myself through the thick underbrush. The freezing rain was relentless, plastering my hair to my face and turning the forest floor into a treacherous, muddy slide. My vision swam with dark, watery halos. You are not running for yourself anymore, I reminded myself, pressing a trembling hand against my lower stomach. You are running for them. I needed to cross the Silverwood River. It was the natural boundary dividing the Blackwood Empire from the lawless, neutral territories. But the main stone bridge would be crawling with royal enforcers within minutes. Kalen's strategic mind was flawless. He would immediately lock down all major exit points. To survive, I had to think like a rogue. I had to think like my father. Instead of heading toward the bridge, I turned north, heading toward the Whispering Gorge. It was a steep, jagged ravine where the river raged narrow and deep, surrounded by unstable slate cliffs. It was highly dangerous, and precisely why Kalen's guards wouldn't expect me to attempt it, especially not in a storm. As I staggered through the dense pines, the physical effects of the wolfsbane intensified. A high fever was setting in, making my skin flush hot despite the freezing rain. I stumbled, my boot catching on an exposed root, and fell hard onto the wet earth. I lay there for a long moment, the mud pressing against my cheek. The urge to just close my eyes and let the darkness take me was overwhelmingly sweet. But then, the distant rhythmic thudding of heavy paws sounded in the forest behind me. Tracking hounds, royal bloodhounds, trained to hunt down rogues by their scent. Panic spiked through my exhaustion. The wolfsbane on my skin would mask my personal scent of honey and lilies. But the physical tracks I was leaving in the mud were a literal map straight to me. Forcing myself up, I dragged my body toward a massive, lightning-struck pine tree. The base was hollowed out and filled with damp, charred charcoal. Using my blistered, raw fingers, I scraped a handful of the black ash and smeared it aggressively over the soles of my boots, my leather trousers, and the hem of my cloak. Charcoal was an excellent natural scent absorber and would help neutralize the organic odors of my sweat and blood. Next, I pulled out my hunting knife. With a steady hand, I cut a thick branch of wild, aromatic pine needles and swept it behind me as I walked backward toward the edge of the gorge, erasing my deep footprints in the mud and replacing them with the natural disturbance of fallen branches. By the time I reached the edge of the Whispering Gorge, my breath was coming in ragged, shallow gasps. Below me, the river was a churning, white-foamed monster, roaring over jagged black rocks. The only way across was a decaying, ancient rope and plank bridge, long abandoned and hanging precariously over the chasm. Several wooden slats were entirely missing, and the ropes looked frayed to the point of snapping. I took a deep breath, the icy air stinging my lungs, and stepped onto the first wet plank. The bridge swayed violently under my weight, tilting toward the roaring abyss below. I gripped the wet, coarse rope with my raw, burned wrists. A white-hot spike of agony shot up my arms, and I had to bite my lip so hard it bled to keep from screaming. Step by step, I forced myself forward. One plank, two. Halfway across, a sudden gust of wind caught my heavy leather cloak, dragging me sideways. My foot slipped through a gap where a plank had rotted away. For a terrifying second, I was dangling over the churning waters, supported only by my agonizingly burned hands, gripping the fraying rope. The silver-infused wolfsbane in my system made my grip weak, my muscles screaming in protest. No, I will not fall here. With a desperate, guttural cry, I ignored the tearing pain in my skin and hauled my knee up, catching the next solid plank. I dragged my body up, shivering, and scrambled the remaining distance on my hands and knees until my fingers sank into the wet mud of the opposite bank. The neutral territories. I looked back across the gorge. Through the sheets of torrential rain, I saw three massive, dark figures emerge from the tree line on the Blackwood side. The royal enforcers. Their wolf eyes glowed a sharp, predatory amber in the darkness. At their head was a massive, pitch-black wolf with chest markings like a silver crescent. Kalen's beta vans. They reached the edge of the cliff, sniffing the air frantically. But the rain, combined with the charcoal and the agonizing wolfsbane, had done its job. They couldn't catch my scent. They stared across the roaring gorge, their jaws set in tight, frustrated growls. They knew the rotting rope bridge couldn't support the weight of their massive wolf forms, and the river below was suicide to cross. I did not wait for them to find another way around. Using the last reserves of my adrenaline, I pushed myself up and stumbled deeper into the dark, lawless forest of the Gray Ridge. Hours passed in a blur of fever and rain. The landscape changed, the towering, pristine pines of the Blackwood territory giving way to stunted, twisted trees and jagged limestone formations. The air here was different. It smelled of sulfur, damp earth, and the faint, bitter tang of decay. My strength was entirely gone. The wolfsbane fever had taken a firm hold of my mind, making the trees spin and dance in the dark. My legs felt like lead, and my vision was fading into a hazy, static gray. Through the mist in my eyes, I spotted a small, dilapidated stone cabin nestled against the side of a cliff. Its roof was partially collapsed, and ivy choked the wooden door. But it was shelter. I dragged my body up to the door and pushed it open. The interior was freezing, smelling of dust and dry rot, but it was dry. I managed to slide the heavy wooden bolt across the door, barricading myself inside. I collapsed onto the cold dirt floor, my body shaking violently with fever. I curled into a tight ball, holding my stomach, praying that my twins were safe from the poison coursing through my veins. "We are safe," I whispered into the dark, my voice barely a breath. "We are free." But as my eyes began to flutter shut, a sudden, distinct sound echoed from the dark corner of the cabin, the soft, slow creak of a floorboard. My heart seized. I tried to reach for the hunting knife at my belt, but my fingers were too weak, slipping uselessly against the leather. A shadow detached itself from the darkest corner of the room, slowly walking toward me. In the dim light filtering through the cracked window, I caught the cold, metallic gleam of a silver blade. "Don't move, girl," a voice grated from the shadows. It was rough, like two stones grinding together, carrying the flat, lawless accent of the neutral territories. The metallic gleam of the silver blade drew closer, stopping mere inches from my throat. My vision swam, the fever making the man's outline warp and double. He was large, smelling of cheap ale, stale grease, and the sharp, coppery tang of unwashed skin. A rogue, a scavenger waiting to strip my carcass. A pretty thing like you shouldn't be out in a storm like this. The rogue sneered, his yellowed teeth visible in the gloom. Especially wearing such fine, royal Blackwood leather. Kalen's enforcers pay well for runaways. My heart hammered against my ribs, but panic would not save me. I had no physical strength left to fight him. I couldn't reach my knife, and Lily was still a silent, shivering spark deep inside my mind. I had to use my head. I had to bargain with the only leverage I had left, my knowledge. I squeezed my eyes shut for a brief second to clear the static, then forced myself to look directly into his hostile, amber eyes. If you turn me in," I gasped, the words scraping against my raw throat. "You'll be dead before the enforcers even reach the border." The rogue paused, his eyes narrowing. "You think a weak little Omega can threaten me?" "Not me," I whispered, lifting my trembling, blistered hand, just enough to show him the black, bubbling sores on my wrist. "Look at my skin. That's pure, liquid wolfsbane. It has already seeped into my bloodstream. If you touch my blood, or if you try to drag me back, the contact will poison you too. Look at your knife. It has silver rust on the hilt. You're already suffering from mild silver rot on your knuckles, aren't you?" The rogue flinched, his eyes darting to his own hand. I had noticed the slight, blackish discoloration around his joint, a common ailment for low-tier rogues who used poorly maintained silver weapons. "I am a healer," I pressed on, my voice growing weaker as the darkness clawed at the edges of my mind. I know how to extract the silver rot, and I can tell you how to cure it. But if I die here, you get nothing but a poisoned corpse and Kalen's wrath for harborers." He stared at me, his chest heaving, calculating the risk. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Finally, with a low curse, he lowered the blade. "You've got sand, girl," he muttered, reaching down to grab my collar. "But if you're lying, I'll carve you up myself." "You winter sage," I mumbled, my consciousness finally slipping. "Crush it with charcoal. Boil it." The darkness claimed me. Recovery did not come quickly, nor did it come easy. For 3 agonizing weeks, I hovered between life and death in a corner of the rogue's damp cabin. The rogue, whose name was Garrett, had begrudgingly followed my half-delirious instructions. He had boiled the winter sage and charcoal, applying the messy paste to my blistered wrists and forcing the bitter, non-toxic root teas down my throat to flush out the wolfsbane. Every morning was a battle of fire and ice. My wolf, Lily, remained deeply dormant, her energy entirely redirected toward shielding the twin embryos in my womb from the poison. Because of her dormancy, my physical wounds healed at a human pace. The skin on my wrists and neck scarred over, jagged, silver-tinged marks that would forever remind me of the night I tore myself away from the Alpha King. But I survived, and so did my babies. By the time the 5th month arrived, the freezing winter rain had given way to the heavy, oppressive humidity of summer. I had left Garrett's cabin as soon as I could walk, traveling deeper into the neutral territories under the assumed name of Eve. I settled in Siltbrook, a rough, gray stone settlement built in the shadow of the jagged limestone cliffs of the Gray Ridge. It was a lawless, miserable place smelling of sulfur, damp earth, and coal dust. But it was exactly what I needed. Nobody asked questions in Siltbrook. Everyone here was running from something or someone. I rented a tiny, drafty room above a noisy, low-tier tavern called the Cracked Keg. To pay my rent and buy food, I established myself as the settlement's quiet herbalist. "Here you go, Martha," I said, handing a small clay jar of wild garlic salve to the tavern owner's wife. "Rub this on your joints twice a day. It will keep the dampness from settling in." "Bless you, Eve," Martha sighed, placing 3 copper coins into my hand. She glanced down at my heavily rounded stomach, her eyes softening with a rare moment of sympathy. "You're getting close, aren't you? A single mother in a place like this. It's a hard life. Your late husband must have been a brave man to leave you with enough coin to get by." "He was complicated," I replied softly, offering a tight, practiced smile. The lie had become second nature. I told everyone my mate had died in a rogue raid before we could reach the safety of the Western Territories. It explained my lack of a pack link, my deep sadness, and my solitary existence. To ensure no wandering traveler could ever trace me, I was meticulous. My natural scent of wild honey and lilies was a dead giveaway of my high-born fated mate status. To combat this, I washed my clothes in a bitter decoction of sulfur weed and damp peat. It made me smell like the rest of the miserable Siltbrook locals. Pungent, earthy, and entirely unremarkable. My wrists, wrapped in thick linen bandages under the guise of an old burn injury, hid the telltale wolfsbane scars. But peace in Siltbrook was an illusion. That evening, as I sat in my small room, stitching a pair of tiny, woolen baby blankets, the rowdy noise from the tavern downstairs suddenly quieted. The constant clinking of ale mugs and drunken laughter cut off, replaced by a tense, heavy silence that vibrated through the floorboards. My heart leaped into my throat. An unfamiliar scent began to seep through the floor crevice. It wasn't the usual smell of stale ale, sweat, and coal dust. It was the scent of crisp pine, crackling ozone, and a dominant, crushing presence that made the air in my room feel suddenly thin. An alpha aura, but it wasn't Kalen's winter frost. This scent was different, sharper, more volatile, like a lightning storm brewing over a pine forest. I stood up, my hand instinctively dropping to my swollen belly as my dormant wolf, Lily, let out a tiny, warning flutter in the back of my mind. The Blackwood enforcers hadn't found me. But someone else, someone incredibly powerful, had just entered Siltbrook. The heavy silence from the tavern below pressed upward, thick and suffocating. The air in my tiny room grew cold, but it was a different cold than Kalen's biting frost. This was a heavy, static tension that made the hairs on my arms stand up. The scent of ozone and sharp pine intensified, slicing through the foul smell of sulfur weed and old peat that I had meticulously used to coat my floorboards and clothes. Suddenly, a frantic, hurried pounding sounded on my door. "Eve, Eve, please, you must open." Martha's voice was a panicked, breathless wheeze. I moved with careful, deliberate speed. I swept the half-stitched baby blankets beneath my thin mattress, adjusted the loose linen tunic over my heavily rounded 5-month belly, and made sure the bandages around my scarred wrists were secure. I pulled a simple, worn wool shawl over my shoulders before sliding the deadbolt back. Martha stood in the doorway, her face entirely drained of color, her hands shaking so violently she could barely keep them clasped. "Martha, what is it?" "Breathe," I whispered, keeping my voice low and steady. "Soldiers, Eve. Royal soldiers from the Silvercrest Union." She gasped, gripping my forearms. "They've blocked both ends of the street. Their leader, the Alpha King himself, Valerius, he's downstairs. One of his elite commanders was ambushed by rogue shadow blades at the border. The blade was dipped in nightshade rot. Our local apothecary ran away the second he saw the crests, and they've dragged my husband to the floor. They said if we don't find a healer who can purge the poison within the hour, they'll burn the cracked keg to the ground with everyone inside." My blood ran cold. Alpha King Valerius, the sovereign of the vast, mountainous Silvercrest Union. He was Kalen's primary, most dangerous political rival. The two empires had hovered on the brink of war for a decade, separated only by this narrow strip of neutral territory. Valerius was known to be a brilliant tactician, ruthless to his enemies, but fiercely loyal to his own people. If he was here, Siltbrook was currently a powder keg. "Take me to him," I said quietly, grabbing my leather medical bag from the wooden peg by the window. "Eve, no. Look at you. You're heavily pregnant," Martha pleaded, her eyes darting to my stomach. "And you're just an Omega. His aura, it will crush you." "If I don't go, we all die anyway," I replied, my voice carrying a quiet authority that caught her off guard. "Let's go." As we descended the narrow, creaking wooden staircase, the density of the air became almost unbearable. The physical weight of Valerius's alpha aura lay over the tavern room like a heavy iron shroud. Several low-tier rogue patrons were already on their knees, their heads pressed against the sticky, ale-stained floorboards, gasping for breath under the sheer dominance of the pressure. In the center of the room lay a massive, heavily built warrior on a long wooden table. His shirt had been torn open, revealing a black, rotting wound spreading across his left shoulder. The veins around the injury were bulging and dark, tracing a lethal path toward his collarbone. Nightshade rot. A cruel, slow-acting toxin designed to paralyze and kill even the strongest of wolves. Standing over him was a man who commanded the space without saying a single word. Valerius. He was towering, with broad shoulders clad in dark steel armor and a heavy, fur-lined cloak. His hair was the color of a winter storm, and his eyes, striking, electric silver blue, swept over the room with cold, lethal precision. The moment my foot hit the bottom step, his gaze snapped directly to me. His eyes narrowed. I felt his powerful aura flare, testing me, pushing against my chest like a physical wall. My wolf, Lily, let out a sharp, warning growl in my mind. But I forced her down, refusing to let her retaliate. I took a slow, deep breath, deliberately allowing the oppressive aura to make my knees tremble slightly, playing the part of a weak, frightened Omega. I bowed my head, keeping my eyes fixed on the floor. Is this the only healer left in this wretched hive? Valerius's voice was a deep, resonant rumble that vibrated through my bones. Yes, Your Grace, Martha whimpered, retreating into the shadows behind me. This is Eve. She is highly skilled. Valerius stepped closer, his heavy leather boots thudding against the floorboards. The scent of ozone and sharp pine washed over me, nearly drowning out my sulfur weed camouflage. He stopped barely 2 feet away, looking down at my heavily rounded stomach, then at the thick linen bandages wrapped around my wrists. You are pregnant, Omega. Valerius noted, his tone cool, analytical, and entirely devoid of warmth. And your wolf is incredibly weak. I can barely feel her spark. How do you expect to survive the feedback of purging royal-grade poison? A healer's skill lies in her mind, not the strength of her wolf, Your Grace. I replied, keeping my voice soft, humble, but entirely steady. I stepped past him toward the table, focusing my attention on the dying commander. If I do not begin immediately, the rot will reach his heart in 15 minutes. Valerius watched me, his silver blue eyes burning into my back. Begin. But know this, healer. If he dies, your life is forfeit. I did not answer. I opened my bag and began to work, my movements fluid and precise, born of years of training as the head healer of the Blackwood Royal Court. I took out a small silver scalpel, a jar of crushed moongrass, and a bottle of highly concentrated sulfur weed extract. Hold his legs down, I commanded 2 of his nearby soldiers. They hesitated, looking to Valerius for permission. The Alpha King gave a brief, imperceptible nod. Using the scalpel, I made a deep, cross-shaped incision directly over the blackest part of the wound. The commander groaned, his body convulsing as thick, black, foul-smelling blood welled up. The silver in the weapon reacted with his blood, accelerating the decay. I explained quietly, working with calculated speed. I poured the sulfur weed extract directly into the open cut. The reaction was violent. The liquid hissed and bubbled, turning a sickly gray as it neutralized the nightshade toxin. The commander screamed in agony, his claws tearing into the wooden table. "I'll hold him," I snapped, my voice losing its timid Omega facade, replaced by the commanding tone of a high-heeled physician. I reached into my bag and pulled out a rare, dried root, sundrop root, which I had scavenged from the high cliffs of Grey Ridge. It was a natural regenerator that stimulated a wolf's dormant healing factor. I crushed it between my palms, mixing it with the moongrass paste, and pressed it firmly into the wound. I closed my eyes, focusing the tiny, hidden reserves of my own healing energy through my fingertips. Lily stirred, sending a small, warm current of pure, royal-grade life force through my hands and into the commander's body. The dark, bulging veins around his collarbone began to recede, turning from black to a healthy, natural red. The commander's breathing, once shallow and rattling, immediately smoothed out. I pulled my hands back, wiping the sweat from my forehead with the back of my sleeve. The poison is purged. He needs to rest and drink plenty of clean water. The wound will heal by morning. The tavern was dead silent. The soldiers stared at me in absolute shock, while Valerius stepped closer to the table, inspecting his commander's steady breathing. "Incredible," Valerius murmured. He turned his gaze slowly back to me, his silver blue eyes locked onto my face. He stepped closer, his aura shifting from dominant to intensely curious. He leaned down slightly, his sharp nose catching the air around my collarbone. "You smell of sulfur and damp peat, healer," he whispered, his voice dangerously low, meant for my ears only. A clever disguise to blend in with the filth of Siltbrook. But under the rot, I can smell the faint, undeniable trace of wild honey and lilies, a scent that belongs only to a high-born fated mate. My heart stopped beating, my breath caught in my throat. Valerius reached out, his large, calloused hand gently but firmly grabbing my bandaged wrist. The contact sent a jolt of static electricity through my skin. He pulled my hand up, his thumb tracing the shape of the thick scars hidden beneath the linen. And these scars, they are not from a fire, Eve, Valerius whispered, his eyes locking onto mine with a terrifying, brilliant intensity. These are wolfsbane burns, the kind used by high-tier runaways to mask their scent from a royal tracking pack. He slowly lowered his gaze to my swollen stomach. He closed his eyes for a brief second, his ears twitching as he listened. And inside you, I hear two distinct, incredibly powerful heartbeats, Valerius murmured, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his aristocratic face. A weak, rogue Omega carrying royal twins. Who are you really, Eve? And who is the Alpha King who drove you into the dirt of Siltbrook? Before I could pull away, the heavy wooden doors of the cracked keg were violently thrown open, splintering against the stone walls. A soldier rushed in, his armor covered in mud and blood. "Your Grace," the soldier gasped, falling to one knee. "We have a problem. A massive elite force from the Blackwood Empire has just crossed the border line. They are led by the Alpha King Kalen himself, and they are marching straight towards Siltbrook." The soldier's frantic words hung in the air like a heavy frost, instantly freezing the room. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild, trapped bird frantic to escape. Kalen. He was here, at the border, marching on this very settlement. Why? Had his tracking hound somehow caught a phantom trace of my scent despite the wolf's bane? Or had his ruthless spies located the fated mate who dared to vanish before dawn? Beside me, Valerius did not release his iron grip on my bandaged wrist. Instead, his fingers tightened slightly, not enough to bruise, but enough to remind me that I was completely within his power. His brilliant silver-blue eyes studied my face, watching the color drain from my cheeks. He was a master predator, reading my micro-expressions with lethal accuracy. He heard the sudden, erratic spike in my twin babies' heartbeats, a synchronized, rapid thumping beneath my linen tunic. "A massive elite force," Valerius murmured, his voice deadly calm, though his sharp pine and ozone scent flared with a dangerous, electric warning. Kalen does not march his elite vanguard into neutral territory for a routine patrol. He is looking for something, or someone. He leaned in closer, his lips brushing the edge of my ear as he spoke in a low, gravelly whisper. "He is looking for you, isn't he, Eve? The low-born Omega who carries his royal lineage." I swallowed the lump of terror rising in my throat. I had to maintain my composure. If I panicked, if I acted like a helpless victim, Valerius would use me as a simple piece of political leverage to hand back to Kalen in exchange for territorial concessions. I had to give him a reason to shield me. I had to use my intellect. "If you hand me over to him, Your Grace," I whispered back, my voice trembling but filled with a hard, unyielding weight, "you lose your greatest advantage, and you sign the death warrant of Siltbrook. Kalen is not here to negotiate. He is here to claim his incubator and eliminate anyone who assisted her. If he finds out I was sheltered in your territory, he will use it as the perfect, righteous pretext to launch the war he has wanted for a decade. He will frame you as a kidnapper of his fated mate." Valerius's eyes flashed, the silver blue turning almost dark as storm clouds. He was silent for a long, agonizing moment, weighing the strategic variables. He was a king who ruled through absolute calculation. War was costly, but so was showing weakness. My commander is alive because of you, Valerius said quietly, his gaze shifting to the resting warrior on the table. The Silver Crest Union does not pay its debts in blood and betrayal. With a sudden, decisive motion, he released my wrist and turned to his lead guard. Clear the medical supplies. Hide the scalpel and the blood, Valerius commanded, his voice ringing with absolute authority. Take the healer to my personal carriage behind the tavern. Surround it with our elite guard. If any Blackwood scout gets within 10 feet of it, gut them. Your Grace, I intervened, stepping forward and ignoring the sudden stitch of pain in my side. His hounds. Even if I am in your carriage, Kaelin's bloodhounds can trace my blood from the commander's wound, and my own scent, if I sweat from fear, will cut through the sulfur weed. Valerius looked at me, a flicker of genuine respect crossing his stern features. You are remarkably logical for a runaway, Omega. He reached for the heavy, fur-lined cloak draped over his broad shoulders. With a sweeping motion, he wrapped it around my shoulders. The garment was massive, burying my pregnant form completely beneath its heavy folds. But more importantly, the cloak was saturated with Valerius's own dominant, suffocating scent of static ozone and sharp pine. It was an alpha's personal garment, carrying an aura so intense it would act as a physical shield, utterly obliterating any faint, trace scent of wild honey and lilies beneath it. Go, Valerius ordered, and keep your head down. 2 elite Silvercrest soldiers quickly ushered me out of the tavern's rear exit. The cold night air hit my face, but it was already changing. The humid summer breeze of Siltbrook was rapidly dying, replaced by an unnatural, creeping chill that made my breath bloom into faint white plumes. A winter storm was coming. Kaelin's aura. I was escorted into a massive, heavily armored carriage built of dark mountain timber and reinforced steel, bearing the Silver Crest emblem. The interior was plush, but functional, smelling of leather and Valerius's sharp scent. I pulled the heavy velvet curtains shut, leaving only a tiny crack to peer out into the dark, mud-slicked street. 10 minutes later, the temperature plummeted. The puddles in the cobblestone streets began to glaze over with thin sheets of ice. The light rain turned to heavy, biting sleet, and then they arrived. The rhythmic, thunderous thudding of armored paws shook the earth. Out of the dark mist, dozens of massive, silver-armored wolves materialized, their eyes glowing a predatory amber. At the front of the column rode a stallion the color of midnight, carrying a man whose very presence demanded the world bow. Kaelin, he was as breathtakingly handsome as he was terrifying. His aristocratic features were carved from marble, cold and unyielding. His dark hair was dusted with frost, and his eyes, the color of a frozen lake, swept over Siltbrook with a chilling, predatory hunger. His scent of cedarwood and bitter winter frost spilled across the settlement, a dominant, suffocating wave that clashed violently with the static, electric ozone of Valerius's domain. Kaelin dismounted with fluid, lethal grace, his heavy black cloak billowing behind him. He did not walk. He stalked, his hand resting on the hilt of his broadsword. The doors of the cracked keg opened, and Valerius stepped out onto the wooden porch, his arms crossed over his chest, his silver blue eyes locking onto his rival. The 2 Alpha Kings stood barely 10 feet apart, the physical pressure of their clashing auras creating a visible tremor in the falling sleet. The air hummed, a high-frequency vibration that made my teeth ache even inside the carriage. Kaelin, Valerius greeted, his voice a low, mocking rumble. I did not expect the ruler of the Blackwood Empire to play the part of a common rogue, raiding neutral settlements in the dead of night. Kalen's face remained a mask of absolute frozen stone. You know why I am here, Valerius. Do not play games with me. A thief has stolen something of mine, and the trail ends in Siltbrook. A thief? Valerius chuckled coldly. In Siltbrook, everyone is a thief. You'll have to be more specific, Blackwood. Kalen stepped closer, his boots crunching on the newly formed ice. The air around him seemed to freeze solid. My fated mate. She fled my citadel 5 months ago. My trackers have followed a faint, masked trail through the mountains. She is here, Valerius. Hand her over, and I will spare this wretched town. Hide her, and I will turn Siltbrook into a graveyard. Inside the carriage, I pressed my hand against my stomach, holding my breath, my heart rate skyrocketing. Kalen was so close, just 50 feet away. If he turned his head, if his beasts caught even a fraction of my scent, the illusion would shatter. Valerius did not flinch. He stood his ground, his eyes narrowing into cold slits. I have no interest in your domestic disputes, Kalen. Valerius replied, his voice dripping with smooth, calculated indifference. But this settlement is currently under the protection of the Silver Crest Union, while my forces are stationed here. You have no jurisdiction. If you want to search Siltbrook, you will have to march over my dead soldiers. And you know exactly what that means. Kalen's eyes flared, a lethal, feral gold bleeding into his frozen pupils. He slowly drew his broadsword, the silver blade gleaming in the dim lantern light. Then let the blood flow, Kalen whispered. The scraping sound of Kalen's broadsword leaving its scabbard was a high, thin whistle that pierced the freezing air. Outside, the tension snapped. Behind Kalen, the massive, armored wolves of the Blackwood vanguard bared their fangs, low, rumbling vibrations rising from their chests. On the porch, Valerius's elite guard drew their spears, the steel points catching the dim, icy light. I pressed my face against the narrow crack of the carriage curtain, my breath catching. This cannot happen, I thought, panic clawing at my throat. If they fight, Kalen will tear this place apart. He will ransack every carriage, every home. He will find me. Even worse, the heavy vibrations of their clashing alpha auras were starting to make me physically ill. My twins were highly sensitive to the raw power in the air. I could feel them shifting restlessly within my womb, their heartbeats frantic. Just then, 3 of Kalen's elite royal bloodhounds, massive beasts with dark, scarred muzzles, broke from the rear of the Blackwood line. They snuffed the frozen ground frantically, their heavy paws sliding on the ice as they drawn closer to the carriage line. They were catching something, even through the thick, ozone-heavy fabric of Valerius's fur cloak. The scent of my rising fear was beginning to seep out. The lead hound stopped, its head snapping directly toward the armored carriage. It let out a sharp, warning bark, its nostrils flaring. No. Think, Evelyn. Think like a survivalist. My fingers scrambled into my leather medical bag, finding a small corked vial of concentrated sulfur weed extract and a tiny pouch of dried mint root. These were highly volatile, pungent botanical agents. Keeping my hands perfectly steady despite my racing heart, I uncorked the vial and mixed the liquid with the crushed mint root in my palm. The chemical reaction was immediate, producing a sharp, bitter, and intensely irritating vapor. The carriage had a small, iron-grated floor vent designed to drain meltwater in winter. I leaned down and poured the sizzling gray mixture directly down the vent. It dripped onto the wet, muddy carriage wheels and the slush directly beneath the floorboards, vaporizing instantly in the freezing sleet. Outside, the lead bloodhound trotted up to the carriage wheel, its wet snout sniffing aggressively. The moment it inhaled the invisible, rising vapor, the beast froze. It let out a sudden, high-pitched yip of sheer distress. It began to sneeze violently, pawing at its muzzle as the mint root and sulfur weed vapor temporarily scorched its ultra-sensitive olfactory receptors. The other two hounds, catching the drift, recoiled instantly, whimpering and shaking their heads as their tracking senses were completely blinded. Vance, Kaelin's beta, cursed loudly, dragging the lead hound back by its heavy collar. "Sire, the hounds have hit a pocket of rancid battlefield waste or sulfur runoff. Their noses are shot. We can't rely on them to pinpoint her scent in this weather." Kaelin's jaw clenched, his gaze tracking the whimpering hounds. His eyes slowly shifted from the dogs to the carriage. "Valerius," Kaelin said, his voice vibrating with dangerous ice. "I will search those carriages myself. You will not touch a single door of my convoy, Blackwood." Valerius growled, stepping off the porch. The static ozone in the air flared so hot I could smell the scent of scorched pine. To search my personal carriage is an act of war. They were seconds away from tearing each other's throats out. Valerius was proud. He would never allow Kaelin to violate his sovereignty. But pride would get us all killed. I looked out the side window. Standing mere inches from the carriage wheel was the elite commander I had just healed. He was standing guard, his hand on his sword, his jaw set. He was within whispering distance. I cracked the carriage window by a mere fraction of an inch, keeping my face hidden in the deep shadows of Valerius's massive hood. "Oh, Commander," I breathed, my voice barely a thread of wind against the howling sleet. The warrior's ears twitched. He did not turn his head, a true professional, but his posture tensed, indicating he was listening. "Listen to me carefully," I whispered rapidly, pouring every ounce of authority I had as the former Luna into my words. "Through your mind link, tells Alpha King Valerius this exact phrase. The Obsidian Legion is not at his back. Kaelin left his southern border completely undefended to launch this hunt. If he starts a war here, the Northern Alliance will occupy his capital within 3 days. Tell him now." The commander's shoulder blades tightened. As a high-tier wolf, he possessed a direct telepathic link to his Alpha King. I watched as he closed his eyes for a split second, projecting the intelligence straight into Valerius's mind. On the street, Valerius was about to raise his sword. Suddenly, he froze. His electric silver-blue eyes widened slightly, then narrowed as he looked at the commander, who gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. A slow, highly dangerous smile spread across Valerius's face. The tension in his shoulders relaxed, replaced by the smug satisfaction of a player who had just been handed the winning card in a rigged game. Valerius lowered his sword, resting the tip casually against the frozen ground. "You speak of war, Kaelin," Valerius said, his voice carrying easily over the wind, dripping with mockery. "But we both know you cannot afford it tonight. Tell me, how is the weather on your southern border? I hear the Obsidian Legion is quite absent. I wonder if the Northern Alliance has noticed how quiet your capital's gates are. I imagine it would only take them 3 days to march on the lunar citadel if they realized the Alpha King had abandoned his post to chase a runaway Omega." The effect of the words was instantaneous. Kaelin's icy composure completely shattered. His frozen lake eyes flared with a terrifying golden light, and his hand gripped the hilt of his sword so tightly his knuckles turned white. "How do you know that?" Kaelin whispered, the words hissed through bared fangs. It was a state secret. Only Kaelin, his beta Vance, and the supreme generals of the Blackwood military knew the Obsidian Legion had been secretly reassigned to the border to assist in the hunt. To the rest of the world, the Legion was supposed to be guarding the capital. The fact that Valerius knew this highly classified vulnerability meant only one of 2 things. Either Valerius had a spy at the absolute highest level of Kaelin's inner circle, or Kaelin's political flank was indeed in immediate, catastrophic danger. Valerius chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound. "I am a king, Kaelin. I make it my business to know when my enemies are acting like fools. Now, Take your whimpering dogs and your frozen soldiers and get off my territory. Before I decide to send a raven to the northern duke, the silence that followed was suffocating. Kalen stared at Valerius, his breathing heavy, his chest rising and falling. His tactical mind was screaming at him. He had been completely checked. If he engaged Valerius here, the delay would cost him his empire. With a low feral growl, Kalen slowly sheared his broadsword. "This is not over, Valerius," Kalen said, his voice a promise of pure death. "Keep the town. Keep the mud. But if I find out you are hiding her, I will tear the Silver Crest Union down stone by stone." He spun on his heel, his black cloak billowing, and vaulted onto his midnight horse. "Fall back," Vance roared. With the speed of a winter storm, the Blackwood vanguard turned, their massive paws throwing up chunks of ice and mud as they retreated back toward the border. Inside the carriage, I let out a long, shuddering breath, collapsing against the plush leather seats. My hands shook violently as the adrenaline left my system. We had survived. The carriage door suddenly clicked and swung open. Valerius stepped inside, his massive, snow-dusted form filling the space. He shut the door behind him, sealing us in the dark warmth of the interior. He did not sit. He stood over me, his silver blue eyes burning with a brilliant, terrifying curiosity in the dim light. He reached down, slowly sliding his heavy, scent-saturated cloak off my shoulders, exposing my pale face and my heavily rounded stomach. "That was a masterclass in political execution, Eve," Valerius murmured, his voice dangerously low, his thumb gently tracing the line of my jaw. "You just checked the Alpha King of the Blackwood Empire with a single whispered sentence. You are no low-born Omega. Who are you?" He leaned in closer, his static-heavy aura wrapping around me like a velvet trap. "And more importantly, how would you like to become the personal advisor to the king of the Silver Crest Union?" I stared at Valerius, my chest rising and falling in shallow, rapid breaths. His static-heavy aura of pine and sharp ozone hummed around us, thick and enticing. Yet my mind remained perfectly clear. I was no longer the naive girl who had fallen blindly for Kalen's sweet, empty promises. I had paid for my freedom in blood, scars, and poison. "I am a healer, Your Grace," I replied, my voice steady, meeting his intense silver-blue eyes without flinching. "And I am a mother who will do whatever it takes to ensure her children are never turned into political pawns. I do not seek power, nor do I seek a crown. But I will offer you my mind, my knowledge of the Blackwood Empire, its military logistics, and its court politics, on one condition." Valerius tilted his head, a faint, intrigued smirk playing on his lips. "An Omega setting conditions for an Alpha King. Bold. What is your price, Eve?" "Sanctuary," I said, holding his gaze. "A secure place within the Silver Crest Union, where my children can be born safely, far from Kalen's reach. And your solemn vow that you will never use my children as bargaining chips in your treaties, nor force me to return to him." The Alpha King watched me for a long, agonizing moment. The silence inside the carriage was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic thud of the wheels on the rocky mountain road as the carriage began its steep ascent into the freezing peaks of the Silver Crest Union. Finally, Valerius leaned back against the leather seat, the tension in his broad shoulders melting into an amused, highly respectful posture. "You have a deal, Eve," he murmured, his voice a deep, gravelly rumble. "The Silver Crest Union protects its own. Welcome to the Spire." 4 months passed in a blur of cold, pristine mountain air and deep, intellectual focus. True to his word, Valerius placed me in a secluded, heavily fortified stone villa nestled on the high cliffs of the Frostspire Citadel. The air here was thin and sweet, smelling of fresh mountain snow, slate, and wild winter sage. Under the constant protective umbrella of Valerius's personal guard, I was safe. My physical recovery was slow, but steady. With the wolfsbane entirely flushed from my system, my wolf, Lily, slowly began to awaken from her deep hibernation. For the first time in months, I felt her warm, soothing presence in the back of my mind. The silver-tinged scars on my wrists and neck faded from raw, black burns to smooth, pale ridges, silent badges of my survival. As my wolf healed, my natural scent of wild honey and lilies began to return, richer and more mature than before. To respect my privacy and my safety, Valerius had my villa lined with active ozone diffusers, ensuring my scent remained confined within the stone walls. During these months, I did not sit idle. Every week, Valerius came to my study. We spent hours over massive maps of the northern borders, analyzing trade routes and political treaties. I showed him the precise, hidden weaknesses in the Blackwood defense lines. Not to incite a war, but to construct an impenetrable defense that would deter Kalen from ever attempting to cross the neutral border again. My intellect became Valerius's most formidable silent weapon. And in return, he gave me his respect, treating me not as a weak, low-born Omega, but as an intellectual equal. Then, in the dead of winter, during a fierce blizzard that rattled the reinforced glass of my bedchamber, my twins were born. The labor was agonizing, lasting nearly 18 hours. Because my wolf was still recovering, I could not rely on accelerated healing. Every contraction was a physical battle. But as the first light of dawn broke over the snow-capped mountains, the room was filled with the soft, synchronized cries of two healthy babies, a boy and a girl, as I cradled them against my bare chest. The overwhelming wave of maternal love made the tears slip silently down my cheeks. They were perfect. The boy, whom I named Aiden, had a faint tuft of dark hair and a tiny, fierce grip. The girl, Clara, had soft, golden brown eyes that blinked curiously at the world. But as I looked closer at their tiny, newborn's features, my breath caught. Both of them possessed a faint, barely visible birthmark on the back of their necks. A silver crescent moon crest, the ancient, undeniable biological signature of the Blackwood royal lineage. They are beautiful, Evelyn. A deep voice quieted the room. I looked up to see Valerius standing in the doorway. He had entered silently, his massive fur-lined cloak carrying the crisp scent of the falling snow outside. He walked over to the bedside, his silver blue eyes softening as he gazed down at the two tiny heartbeats. They carry his mark, Valerius noted, his voice carrying a quiet gravity. If Kalen's spies ever catch sight of them, he will recognize them instantly. He will claim they were stolen from his court. They were not stolen, I whispered, my voice fierce as I tightened my arms around my children. They are mine. He made his choice. He chose the crown and a political marriage over his fated mate. He has no right to them. Valerius nodded slowly. He reached down, his large, scarred index finger gently brushing Clara's tiny, soft cheek. The secret is safe with me, Evelyn, he promised. But the political winds are shifting. Kalen has spent the last 4 months consolidating his southern borders. The Northern Alliance has backed down, and Selena's father has officially marched his armies back. Kalen is free of distractions now. My heart seized. Is he coming? Worse, Valerius replied, his expression hardening into cold steel. He has appealed to the High Council of Pax. He has filed a formal charge against the Silvercrest Union, accusing me of harboring his fated mate and theft of royal legacy. The council has ordered a mandatory imperial summit at the neutral peak in 2 weeks. He looked directly into my eyes, his static, heavy aura flaring with a protective, dangerous heat. The council has demanded that I bring the healer Eve to the summit to undergo a public truth serum interrogation and pack link verification. If I refuse, they will sanction a joint military invasion of our territory. Kalen is trying to force my hand, Evelyn. He wants to drag you back to his citadel in chains. I stared at him, the fear clawing at my chest. But then I looked down at my sleeping twins. The silver crescent marks on their necks gleamed in the morning light. I was no longer the broken, pregnant Omega who had run through the mud in the dead of night. My wolf was awake. My mind was sharp. And I had the backing of a rival empire. A cold, unyielding resolve washed over me, replacing the fear with a lethal, quiet fury. "Then we will go to the summit, Valerius," I said, my voice carrying a chilling, regal authority that made the Alpha King's eyes widen in surprise. "But I will not go as a runaway healer. I will go as your high advisor, clad in the silver of the Silvercrest Union. Let Kalen and Selene see exactly who they discarded." The neutral peak was an ancient, wind-swept summit where the borders of the three great northern empires collided. The high temple of the moon goddess sat atop this jagged peak, carved entirely from cold white marble. Inside the great ceremonial hall, the air was suffocating. Dozens of high-tier alphas and council elders sat in a semi-circle of elevated stone tiers, their collective alpha auras creating a physical gravity that made the ancient tapestries on the walls tremble. On one side of the chamber stood Kalen, the Alpha King of the Blackwood Empire. Beside him was Lady Selene, dressed in elaborate gold silks, her chin tilted high with smug triumph. Kalen's winter frost aura was more volatile than ever, smelling of bitter pine and cracked ice. He looked like a man possessed, his frozen lake eyes scanning the grand entrance with a feral, predatory hunger. The heavy bronze doors of the temple groaned open. A collective gasp echoed through the assembly. I did not walk in as a fugitive. I did not enter as a weak, low-born Omega clinging to the shadows. I stepped into the chamber clad in the royal silver and pristine white of the Silvercrest Union. A beautifully tailored, heavy silk gown draped over my fully recovered, elegant form. My dark hair was swept up in an intricate crown of braids, pinned with silver daggers. My wolf, Lily, was fully awake now. Her presence hummed beneath my skin, radiating a warm, golden, and highly mature aura of wild honey and lilies that filled the marble hall, instantly clashing with Kalen's frost. At my side walked Alpha King Valerius, his towering, armored presence a solid, unyielding shield. His static heavy aura of ozone and sharp pine flared defensively, wrapping around me and warning any wolf in the room who dared to challenge us. Kalen's eyes locked onto me, his breath visibly catching in his throat. The cold marble mask of his face cracked, revealing a torrent of raw shock, possessive fury, and a sudden, agonizing spike of mate bond recognition. "Evelyn," Kalen breathed, taking a half-step forward, his voice a low, desperate vibration. "Her name is Eve, advisor to the Silvercrest Union." Valerius corrected coldly, his voice booming through the silent hall as he stepped slightly in front of me. "And you will address her with the respect her rank demands, Blackwood." Lady Selene's face contorted with ugly rage, her calculated facade slipping. "Council elders, look at her. She stands before you clad in the colors of our enemy. She is the fated mate of the Alpha King of Blackwood, carrying his royal heirs. Yet she has fled to a rival court to sell our military secrets. She is a traitor and a thief." The head elder, a gray-bearded alpha named Tiberius, struck his heavy wooden staff against the stone floor. "Let us have order. Evelyn of Blackwood, you stand accused of desertion, betrayal of your pack link, and the theft of the Blackwood royal legacy. How do you plead?" I stepped out from behind Valerius's shoulder, my movements fluid and regal. I looked directly at the council. then turned my gaze to Kalen, meeting his frozen eyes with a cold, unyielding fire. "I plead innocent of all charges," I said, my voice carrying a crystal-clear, commanding resonance that surprised the entire council. I did not desert my pack. I was forced to flee to protect my life and the lives of my unborn children. And I did not betray my fated mate. He betrayed the sacred bond first. "Lies," Selene hissed. "You are an Omega trying to save your skin. We demand the truth draft. Let the Veritas serum strip away her deceit." "I welcome it," I countered instantly, taking a step forward. Kalen flinched. "Evelyn, no," he muttered, his hand reaching out instinctively. The Veritas serum was highly toxic to wolves. It stripped away all mental barriers, forcing absolute honesty, but causing immense physical pain as the wolf fought the chemical intrusion. "Let the draft be brought," Elder Tiberius commanded. An acolyte stepped forward, holding a silver chalice filled with a shimmering, violet liquid. I did not hesitate. I picked up the chalice and drank the bitter fluid in a single, elegant swallow. The reaction was immediate. A searing, white-hot pressure slammed into my temples as the serum clawed at my mind, trying to force me to my knees. Lily growled in protest, but I forced her to stand down. I gripped the edges of the marble podium, my scarred wrists straining against my silver cuffs. But I kept my spine perfectly straight. "The serum is active," Elder Tiberius declared, his eyes glowing gold. "Evelyn, speak. Why did you flee the lunar citadel on the night before your coronation? Under the absolute, agonizing thrall of the truth draft." My voice remained steady, carrying the raw, undeniable weight of cosmic truth. "I fled," I gasped, the words tearing from my throat with absolute sincerity. "Because I stood behind the mahogany door of Kalen's private study. I heard my fated mate, the Alpha King of Blackwood, speak 18 words to Lady Selene." The chamber was dead silent. Kalen's face drained of all color. He looked like a man standing before a firing squad. "What were those words?" Tiberius pressed, leaning forward. "He said," I whispered, the memory burning like liquid fire in my chest. "She is nothing but a womb to carry the royal lineage, Selene. Once the pup is born, I will banish her to the outer borders and place the crown on your head." A collective, horrified murmur erupted from the council tiers. Under the laws of the moon goddess, the fated mate bond was a sacred, divine covenant. To actively plot the exploitation, discard, and banishment of a fated mate, especially one carrying the pack's royal heirs, to secure a secular political alliance, was the highest, most blasphemous sin an Alpha King could commit. It was an act of spiritual treason. "No. Evelyn." Kalen choked out, his chest heaving as the raw, public exposure of his private transaction shattered his political standing in an instant. Beside him, Selene took a step back, her eyes darting around the room as she realized the trap had just snapped shut on them. "Is this true, King Kalen?" Elder Tiberius demanded, his voice ringing with ancient, divine authority. Kalen could not answer. The absolute silence of his guilt was more damning than any confession. "I did not steal the royal legacy," I continued, my voice rising, fueled by the agonizing truth of the serum. "I saved my children from a stepmother who looked at me with disgust, and a father who viewed them as mere transactions. I sought sanctuary in the Silvercrest Union because its king, Valerius, offered me respect, intellectual equality, and protection. He did not steal me. I chose him." "This is an outrage," Selene shouted desperately. "The children are of Blackwood blood. They belong to the Empire." "The children." Valerius stepped forward, his voice a deafening roar that silenced her completely. were born on Silvercrest soil. Under our ancient laws, any child born of a mother who has been granted official political asylum is a sovereign citizen of the Union. If King Kalen attempts to lay a single finger on Advisor Eve or her children, he will be launching an illegal, unholy war against our entire alliance. And looking at the faces of your own council elders, Kalen, I do not think your pack will march for a cursed king. I looked up at the tiers of the Blackwood Council. The elder wolves were already turning their backs on Kalen, their expressions filled with deep disgust and betrayal. An alpha king who had lost the favor of his fated mate and the blessing of the moon goddess was a liability. His rule was practically over. Kalen sank onto his knees, his frozen lake eyes staring up at me, completely shattered. The mate bond, which he had dismissed as a biological inconvenience, was now tearing through his chest like a physical blade, punishing him for his betrayal. "Evelyn," he whispered, a single tear of pure frost rolling down his cheek. "Please, you made your promise to the crown, Kalen," I said, looking down at him with a cold, beautiful pity. "And you can keep it. But you will never have me, and you will never see your children." Elder Tiberius struck his staff one final time. "The charges against Evelyn are dismissed. The High Council recognizes the sanctuary of the Silvercrest Union. King Kalen, your actions will be reviewed by your pax tribunal. This summit is adjourned." Valerius stepped beside me, his hand gently resting on the small of my back. Together, we turned our backs on the broken king, walking out of the temple and into the brilliant, blinding light of a new dawn. The winter snows had finally melted, giving way to the lush, vibrant green of a mountain spring. High on the sun-drenched terrace of my stone villa in the Frostspire Citadel, the air was sweet and crisp, smelling of fresh pine, blooming winter sage, and the rich, warm scent of wild honey and lilies. In a wide, wooden cradle beneath the shade of a blossoming cherry tree, Aiden and Clara slept side by side. Aiden's tiny fist was wrapped tightly around his sister's soft blanket, his breathing deep and even, while Clara let out a soft, contented sigh in her sleep. The silver crescent birthmarks on the backs of their necks were hidden beneath their soft linen collars, a secret that no longer held the power to terrify me. They were safe. They were free. The political landscape of the Northern Territories had shifted permanently. Following the disastrous Imperial Summit, Kalen's Blackwood Council had initiated a silent, bloodless coup. Stripped of his political allies and his pack's respect, Kalen had been forced to abdicate his throne, passing the crown to his younger, far more honorable cousin. Lady Celine and her father's Northern alliance had fractured, their greed-driven plans dissolving into obscurity. Kalen now lived as a reclusive, broken exile in the remote western estates, the very place he had once promised to banish me. It was a poetic, devastating justice. A soft, familiar step sounded on the stone pathway. I turned to see Valerius walking onto the terrace. He had shed his heavy, battle-worn steel armor, wearing a simple, dark tunic and trousers. His hair, the color of a winter storm, was windswept, and his silver blue eyes softened the moment they landed on me. He carried no dominant, crushing aura today. His scent of ozone and pine was warm, inviting, and completely at peace. "You look beautiful, Evelyn," he said softly, walking over to stand beside me at the stone balustrade, looking out over the sprawling valleys of his kingdom. "I feel at peace, Valerius," I replied, a genuine, warm smile gracing my lips. For the first time in my life, the weight of survival had lifted, replaced by a profound sense of accomplishment. He looked down at the sleeping twins, his eyes filled with a quiet, protective affection. "The Council of Silvercrest has officially signed the declaration. Your children are now recognized as royal heirs of the Spire, with all the protections and privileges of my bloodline. Nobody can ever dispute their safety again. I looked up at him, my heart swelling with deep, genuine gratitude. Thank you, Valerius, for everything. You kept your word. It was an easy vow to keep, he murmured, his gaze shifting to meet mine. He reached out, his large, scarred hand gently covering my wrist, not to restrain me, but to offer a steady, grounding warmth. The touch sent a soft, pleasant jolt of static through my skin, a gentle whisper of a new, different kind of bond blooming between us. He did not push. He did not demand. Valerius respected my boundaries, understanding that my heart had been shattered and required time to rebuild itself on its own terms. I hear the local healers in the lower valley are opening a new academy, Valerius said, a soft, teasing smirk playing on his lips. They are demanding that the Grand Sovereign Advisor herself deliver the inaugural lecture on botanical poisons. I laughed, a bright, clear sound that echoed over the mountain cliffs. Tell them I accept, but only if the king himself promises to sit in the front row. Always, Evelyn. Valerius promised, his silver blue eyes shining with absolute devotion. Always. I turned back to look at my children, then out at the endless, beautiful horizon of the Silvercrest Union. I had survived the ashes of betrayal. I had run through the dark, fought off poison, and defied 2 kings. I was no longer just an Omega, or a fated mate, or a runner in the night. I was a mother. I was a sovereign strategist. I was the architect of my own destiny. And as the warm spring sun bathed the mountain peaks in gold, I knew that our new dawn had finally arrived. Thank you so much, lovely listeners, for embarking on this intense, emotionally gripping journey with me. Evelyn's path from a betrayed, vulnerable Omega to a powerful, strategic sovereign has been an absolute joy to share with you. And I am so grateful for your time and company today. If Evelyn's courage, Valerius's fierce loyalty, and the ultimate downfall of Kaelin kept you on the edge of your seat, please smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with your fellow werewolf romance lovers. The Alpha King's Cruel Promise is a narrative designed to subvert the traditional, often passive, fated mate dynamic. Instead of a female lead who simply endures cruelty or waits for a powerful male savior to correct her path, this story is a deep exploration of female agency, maternal grit, and intellectual empowerment. Evelyn is a protagonist who actively shapes her destiny. Her transitions are grounded in physical realism. Her recovery from the toxic wolfsbane and the exhausting trials of pregnancy are slow and grueling, highlighting her internal resilience. Her victory at the Imperial Summit is not won through raw physical strength, but through her strategic intellect, turning a tool of interrogation, the Veritas Serum, into her ultimate weapon of truth.